The Orioles added some depth this week with the minor league signing of Vimael Machín, but they also lost some depth with a good chunk of players from AAA becoming minor league free agents. We'll break down all the news and notes coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, November 14th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to run through some Orioles news and notes. We'll talk about the O's most recent minor league signing in Vimael Machín, the utility infielder who could at least provide some depth for the O's and maybe a little bit more in 2025 as he does have some big league experience. We'll talk about the list of players who became minor league free agents last week, including some big names like Nick Vespi and Bruce Zimmermann. Will the Orioles try to bring guys like that back on a further deal? And then we'll talk a little bit about some awards, Gold Gloves, Silver Sluggers, Rookie of the Year, some updates surrounding the Orioles. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So we kick off our news and notes episode with another minor league addition to this Orioles system. And that is 31-year-old utility infielder Vimael Machín, who the Orioles signed to a minor league deal with an invite to big league spring training earlier this week, as was reported by ESPN's Jorge Castillo. Now, who is Machín? Well, he is a 31-year-old left-handed hitter who plays all around the infield. At the big league level, has played first base, second base, shortstop, and third. So that makes him, first of all, very, very versatile. Now, he's been pretty much big league average as a defender at all those spots, but it's been a smaller sample size, which we'll get to. I think he's known as at least a solid to plus defender anywhere that he can play in the infield. Now, the last we saw Machín in professional ball was in the Mexican League in 2024, and he lit it up in the Mexican League this year. Now, good to know that the Mexican League is a crazy hitter-friendly environment. You a lot more often will see hitters batting 400 and above because of just the atmosphere, the altitude, the hitting is well above the pitching in terms of talent. It is a big-time hitter's environment. So take these numbers with a grain of salt, but still, in 363 plate appearances in the Mexican League this year, Vimael Machín hit 401 with a 495 on base and a 579 slugging. That's a 1073 OPS. He hit 7 home runs, not known as much of a power hitter, but he walked 56 times to only 37 strikeouts. And a lot of those stats kind of are in line with what we saw from Machín the last time he was playing in affiliated ball, which was in 2023. He began the year in 2023 in AAA with the Philadelphia Phillies, where he played in 52 games and didn't really produce much. He played all around the diamond as a utility guy, but only had a 70 WRC plus in AAA. And it looked like his bat was kind of falling off. The Phillies released him, and he signed with the Mexican League halfway through the 2023 season, played out the year there, and then stuck around with a new team in the Mexican League in 2024. But before that, Machín was a big league player. Like, he was in the major leagues from 2020 to 2022 with the Oakland Athletics. Way back in the day, was a 10th round pick by the Cubs in 2015 out of VCU. If you know anything about college baseball, that was a fantastic 2015 kind of Cinderella run VCU team. Machín was one of their best players. He was then picked up by the A's in the 2019 Rule 5 draft, and so was then placed on their big league roster for the entirety of the 2020 season, and at least stuck around after that in a part-time role. Played 24 games in 2020. Then he was mostly in AAA in 2021, but he did play 15 games in the big leagues where he did not hit at all. And then he really got his biggest chance in 2022 with Oakland. Was a part-time player, appeared in 73 games, and in 253 plate appearances, hit only 1 home run, had a 220 average with 300 on base and a 287 slugging, 10% walk rate, and an 18% strikeout rate for Machín that year. If you read some of his prospect reports, just kind of look what he has done in AAA as a hitter. I mean, he is a career 295 hitter in AAA, and he's known as a guy with good bat control. He doesn't strike out a lot. He's got a good batting eye. He always has high walk rates throughout the minors, and even in his short time in the major leagues, in the big leagues over 3 years, it's an 85 WRC plus in 112 big league games. So he hasn't been much of a hitter, but it's been a fairly small sample size. Why do the O's bring him in? Well, he's a nice guy to have in AAA. Like, the batted ball data, the most recent stuff is from AAA in 2023 with the Phillies. Doesn't really hit the ball hard, but that's not how he projects as a hitter. He is more of a contact-oriented guy who avoids strikeouts, gets on via walks, tries to slap the ball the other way, things like that. I don't think he's in the Orioles' big league plans for 2025 unless there's a lot of injuries and things go wrong. But it is always good to have that AAA depth with big league experience sitting in Norfolk. And again, this guy's not going to take playing time over any prospects the Orioles may have in the infield next year in Norfolk. But what he does give you is a guy who, again, can play all 4 infield positions. That is strong versatility. So whenever anybody needs a day off, whenever anybody gets injured at AAA, whatever it may be, that is why you have a guy like Vimael Machín. And again, last year in AAA, remember, the Orioles had to bring in guys like Nico Goodrum and bring back Terran Vavra and sign guys like Garrett Cooper and others just to fill up at-bats in AAA. Now, they had a good chunk of injuries down there, but also just things happen over a long AAA season. Guys get traded, called up, injured. You always need these kind of guys who have a little bit of big league experience, and Machín has that with 3 different seasons with the Athletics, who's had some success, especially at the AAA level, can handle his own there, and can play multiple positions. He is the perfect player to sign to a minor league deal to have his AAA depth. And again, if things went really poorly and you really needed him in the big leagues, he's had that experience where he can do that. And again, he's a veteran at 31, but he will just be nice depth for the Orioles to have and use him however they need him at AAA next year. But as they add that depth in Vimael Machín, they also lost some depth last week as a good chunk of players were officially named minor league free agents. We will run through the list coming out of the O system, mostly from AAA, and talk about which guys the O should just let walk because there were part-time fixes and which guys the O should think about bringing back to continue to compete for a big league spot next season. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So as we move on our Orioles news and notes episode, we move to the minor league free agents because at the end of every season, you have a chunk of guys who you either signed to minor league deals last offseason, you signed to minor league deals in the middle of the year to help with your depth, or guys who were potentially outrighted off the 40-man roster at some point during the regular season. And all of those players fall into the category of guys who, if you don't proactively re-sign, they become minor league free agents. Now, the Orioles proactively re-signed 2 of these guys. David Banuelos was one of them. He kind of served as their third catcher for a good chunk of this year, was in AAA a good amount, was also the taxi squad catcher traveling with the big league team. The Orioles actually gave him his major league debut for one at-bat early in the season. He was a guy the Orioles clearly liked having around. They brought him back quickly on another minor league deal. And the other one was left-handed pitcher Luis Gonzalez, who the Orioles brought back on a minor league deal last year. He had been in the O's organization back in the mid-2010s under Dan Duquette. He had gone and pitched elsewhere for a while. Then the O's brought him back. He had a really, really good year as a left-handed reliever in AAA Norfolk. Seemed to be even considered for a big league call-up last year. It never happened, but the Orioles clearly wanted to hold on to him because not only did they just re-sign him to a AAA deal, but they went ahead and said, you know what? No minor league deal. We are giving you a 40-man roster spot, and that is what they did with Luis Gonzalez. So I would think they see him in the bullpen plans for 2025. But the rest of the guys on this list have officially become minor league free agents. Now, that does not mean that they are not going to come back to the Orioles, but for right now, they are free to sign anywhere. The only non-AAA guy is Cooper McKeon, who the O's brought in, a year or two back to be kind of a depth arm in the lower minor leagues. Otherwise, all of these guys are AAA players. And basically, I'm going to name them. I'm going to give you a brief summary of kind of what they did last year. And then I will give you my thoughts if I would bring them back on a minor league deal or if I would let them walk. Let's start with Nick Anderson. Nick Anderson, who started last year in the Kansas City Royals big league bullpen. He'd been a closer in the past with the Rays, had been a really good reliever with other teams, has suffered multiple arm and shoulder injuries in his big league career, now in his mid-30s. He bounced around a couple of teams this year. The Orioles signed him to a minor league deal late in the year. They were hoping to add him to the group of the Matt Bowmans and the Colin Selbys of the world, the Birch Smiths, who could come in and kind of help a bullpen get a little bit better down the stretch. But Anderson got injured in AAA. I believe he had been pitching with the Dodgers, then released, and the O's signed him. He got injured in AAA and was out for the remainder of the season. Now, kind of randomly, Rock Kabako of Masson, like right after the season, or at least the playoffs ended this year, mentioned in an article that the Orioles were really interested in bringing Nick Anderson back next year. And it was kind of unprompted. I would assume that means, because of the people who do tell Rock things, that the O's are probably interested in bringing Nick Anderson back. We'll see if that's on a big league contract or on a minor league deal with a big league spring training invite. Either way, I think that means there's a good chance we see Nick Anderson back in Sarasota, legitimately competing for a big league bullpen spot again. He was in the Royals bullpen for a good chunk of last year. He still has big league stuff. The Dodgers helped kind of change his stuff in AAA. He could be a big league reliever for the Orioles next year. The next one is Nolan Hoffman, who was in AAA as a reliever. Hoffman came over a while ago to the Orioles in the minor league phase of the Rule 5 draft. They picked him out of the Seattle Mariners organization, and his first year with the Orioles was in 2022. And then in AAA Norfolk this year, it was his second year in Norfolk, really kind of his first. He got up to Norfolk right at the end of 2023, then spent the entire year in the bullpen, 58 innings, a 3.88 ERA, good strikeout rates, did start walking a good amount of batters, which is not something he'd really done in the past, almost 6 walks per 9 this year. But the fastball velocity jumped way up. It was like 87 up to like 92. The guys at On the Verge were talking about it a little bit last week. It was like the biggest jump in fastball velocity of any pitcher in the minors this year. Now, when you're starting at 87, it's easier to do that. But he's kind of like a sidearm submarine righty with a devastating slider. It's interesting stuff for Hoffman. He's 27 years old, but again, with a little more seasoning, like he could be a big league reliever in 2025. I am absolutely on board with the Orioles bringing him back on another minor league deal. Next one is Adrian Hauser, who's kind of bounced around as a starter and a reliever in the big leagues with the Brewers and the Mets over the past few years. He was kind of getting worse and worse. The Mets let him go this year. The Orioles signed him to a minor league deal late in the season just to provide some starting pitching depth in AAA when the O's were getting injured and calling guys up and trading guys. They just needed some healthy arms in AAA. Hauser became that guy. He never got the call up to the big leagues. He was kind of a patchwork fix. I can't imagine the Orioles are going to bring Hauser back, although he will most likely definitely get a minor league deal elsewhere to continue his baseball career. Next up was Matt Crook, one of the guys on this list who actually did appear in the big leagues with the Orioles this year. Kind of an interesting left-handed reliever. The Orioles claimed him off waivers from the Yankees last offseason. He was on the 40-man roster for a good chunk of this year, made his major league debut, didn't have a very good outing, went back to AAA. It's kind of an interesting mix. He throws a fastball at like 89, 90, but his slider is so good and moves so much that he's still ridiculously nasty. Now, he has some issues with walks, but he also strikes out an incredible amount of batters on the mound, especially at the AAA level. And he has a little bit of big league experience, right? He got the 1 game with the Orioles this year, 4 games with the Yankees last year. You know, it hasn't fully worked out for him. He's a former first-round pick. He's 30 years old already, but, you know, in AAA, he did have some good strikeout numbers and a 3.92 ERA in 44 innings. Just still high walk numbers as usual with Matt Crook. He's a guy who truly fascinates me with the stuff to strikeout ratio. Another guy who I would absolutely be interested in bringing back on a minor league deal. Next up is maybe the biggest name or most well-known name on this list, and that is Nick Vespi, who he was going to be out of options. The Orioles outrighted him off the 40-man roster this year, and he stuck in the organization through most of that, but he did get the chance to become a minor league free agent. And that is what happened here. So Nick Vespi, for the first time since the Orioles drafted him in the 18th round all the way back in 2015, he will be a free agent for the first time now at age 29. Now, in AAA this year, Nick Vespi's whole thing was he was just so dominant at AAA, but he wasn't quite good enough to be a steady big league reliever. That's why he was so up and down for the last 3 years with the O's. And we know, like, he got some big outs at times for the Orioles over the past 3 seasons. He's pitched in 45 big league games now with a 3.88 ERA for the Orioles over the last 3 years. Like, you'll take that. 12 and a third innings, had a 2.92 ERA this year in his 11 chances he got at the big league level. But things kind of tanked on him in the minors this year. He does 7.23 ERA in 42 innings in AAA. He walked 31 batters in 42 and a third innings. That is just not the Nick Vespi we know. So some of it could have been he was just over being in AAA. He was like, I've just been here too long. I deserve more of a big league shot. And that happens for guys. You spend so much time in AAA that you start to lose the effectiveness because, again, it's not the best way to say it, but you kind of almost get bored down there. Like, this is not a challenge for me anymore. The hurdle Vespi always had is, like, again, he only throws like 90 from the left side. And I know his fastball has natural cut, and I know he has a good slider, but it's really hard. It's the similar Matt Crook problem, and Vespi's just done a better job of sticking at the big leagues for times than Crook has. But when you only throw that hard with your fastball, your ceiling is limited as a big league reliever. And I think for Nick Vespi, I would absolutely be interested in bringing him back on a minor league deal if he's open to be depth. And if he is, he'll probably pitch in the big leagues again for the Orioles in 2025. But I would completely understand if Nick Vespi is looking elsewhere. I think there's a chance that maybe a bad team would give him a 1-year cheap major league deal, or at least a bad team gives him a minor league deal with a quicker path into a big league roster spot. I would love to bring him back. I would not be surprised if that's the end of Nick Vespi with the Orioles and he does sign elsewhere that gives him just an easier path to get some time in a big league bullpen. Next up would be Bruce Zimmermann, someone else who the Orioles have a good amount of time with in the big leagues. From 2020 to 2023, he pitched in parts of those seasons with the Orioles, 158 and a third innings and a 5.57 career big league ERA. 2024 was the first time really since he made his debut that he did not pitch in the big leagues all season. Has dealt with multiple injuries over the past few years, which has made it harder for him to get to the majors. Again, only 7 appearances last year and none this year. But we know, like, he was a big part of the rotation for a stretch in 21. He had that awesome start to the year in 2022 where he was dominant and then just kind of fell apart. He's similar to Vespi, where that fastball velocity around 90 miles an hour is just hard to get guys out. He still has a really good slider. His breaking stuff, the stuff plus on it, it still plays out well. You know, he's still 29 years old. He'll turn 30 in February. We know he's a Maryland native, came over in the Kevin Gausman trade in 2018. But Zimmermann, I feel like, is very similar to Vespi, and that Vespi probably, I think, will pitch more big league innings going forward than Bruce Zimmermann does. But again, I would be very on board with bringing Bruce back on a minor league deal, have him be in your AAA rotation as depth, just like I would do with Vespi in the AAA bullpen. But I would understand if Zimmermann finds another team that gives him at least a minor league deal with an easier path back to the big leagues. I would totally understand it. I think Zimmermann would be more likely to be back than Vespi is, but I'd totally be on board with giving them both a chance. Next up is Garrett Cooper. He was a guy that the O's had injuries. They just brought him in, veteran first baseman, to play some at AAA. Don't think he'll be back. JD Davis, kind of the same thing. When the Orioles got, Westberg and Arias hurt, they brought in JD Davis to play some third base at AAA. And the thought was he would eventually come up to the big leagues. He just didn't hit at all in Norfolk and never came up to the bigs. Another guy I think probably is going to sign elsewhere on a minor league deal. Nico Goodrum, really good interview with him over at Orioles on the Verge a couple of weeks ago. Make sure to go and check that out. But another veteran, can play multiple positions, been around the block. O's brought him in to provide AAA depth. Again, we'll see with him, but I would doubt the O's would bring him back for a huge need. Then there's Terrin Vavra. Kind of had an interesting stretch, right? He was up with the Orioles in 2022 and then in 2023. And then he had the crazy shoulder injury, which took him out for most of the season. He returned this year, but was still injured. The Orioles ended up DFAing him. He latched on with the Mariners in AAA briefly. Then they DFA'd him. The Orioles brought him back to AAA Norfolk after that. He ended up playing in 55 games and having a 698 OPS in Norfolk this season, was still battling with the injuries. Vavra guy, again, can play a lot of positions, can play infield, can play the outfield. If he's healthy, I am easily offering him a minor league deal to come back and be very similar to what we talked about with Machine, that he can just be like that AAA utility depth. When guys get hurt, guys get tired, guys get traded, guys get called up, you can call on Machine. You can call on someone like Terrin Vavra. It's just such a limited ceiling with his bat because he doesn't hit for power that I don't know if there's a big league contract out there for him. There probably isn't. So again, he's another guy where if he's willing, I think the O's should be all over bringing him back on a minor league deal. And then the last one is outfielder Forrest Wall. Orioles brought him in off waivers last year. He was with the Braves and the Marlins. Super speedy outfielder, can hit a little bit, was a former first-round pick and top prospect. I did think the O's would maybe bring him to the bigs at some point or potentially think about him as a pinch runner in the postseason. That didn't happen. Maybe they'll look to bring him back because, again, he was a former first-round pick and a former top prospect, and he's not like, it's not like he's 35 years old or anything, so there might be still something in there for Forrest Wall. He's about to turn 29 in a couple of days here. Like, he did play 16 games in the big leagues last year. So maybe they'll bring him back his depth. I'd put him on 50-50 at this point, but that's your list. Minor league free agents where I think they could be back or not, and some names you may know. And then, hey, we still could see some of these names in Norfolk or even in Baltimore at some point next season. But to finish things out, I want to talk about some awards. We've got some updates on some Orioles potentially trying to win some hardware. We'll get to that to finish off the pod coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by SelectQuote. The World Series, Super Bowl, the Olympics, the world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing: teamwork. And teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. And in sports, winning is everything. That's why you always need a good strategy to help you move forward towards goalposts. Winning strategies in life are just as important, and that's why on my team, I'm looking at life insurance through SelectQuote to protect my legacy and my family's financial future. SelectQuote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. And these policies, they're more affordable than you think. You can get coverage for up to $1 million for as little as $20 per month. So get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/lockedon. Go to SelectQuote.com/lockedon today to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/lockedon. So to finish things off today on this News and Notes episode, I want to talk a little bit about some awards that have been given out. We mentioned it briefly on the podcast, but last weekend we've learned that neither Ryan Mountcastle nor Colton Cowser won the Gold Glove in the American League. Mountcastle, of course, up for it at first base. He was never going to win. Carlos Santana was just so all over it at that position this year, but it was just awesome to see Mountcastle be rewarded with a finalist spot for the Gold Glove. Like, everything he's worked on defensively throughout his career to kind of master first base was really cool to see. Unfortunately, with first base, it's so up and down every year. You never know, and especially with his future playing time, this may have been Mounty's only chance to win a Gold Glove. Hopefully it's not, but unfortunately he didn't win. But as I talked about in the last episode when we discussed this, like, it was Carlos Santana's award, and that is who won. In left field, though, Colton Cowser could feel a little jobbed by this one. Cowser did not win the Gold Glove. It was given to Stephen Kwan, left fielder of the Cleveland Guardians, who's won his third consecutive Gold Glove in left field in the American League. And some of it may have had to do with the fact that Kwan is great out there and has won the last two, and voters just know the name well and gave it to him again. But Cowser's numbers were better than Kwan's, and Kwan missed some time with injury. It just felt like a legacy win for Stephen Kwan. But I'll tell you this, if Colton Cowser sticks in left field for the Orioles long-term, he is going to win one, if not multiple Gold Gloves out there. That is how good he is in left field. And we know it was a good year with the bat. He should hopefully win Rookie of the Year, but that glove was the consistency for him. He played a really, really good left field this year. And speaking of Colton Cowser, he is officially one of the three finalists for the American League Rookie of the Year award. Luis Gil and Austin Wells of the Yankees are the other two finalists. And I've talked about it earlier this offseason about Cowser's chances to win that award and the fact that the Orioles would get an extra draft pick if Cowser does win it. It is close. It seems like more of a two-horse race between the starting pitcher, Luis Gil, and Cowser. It seems like Wells will probably finish third. Statistically, Cowser should win the award. He's going up against two Yankees, though, so you never know. I would hope he does for the draft pick and for Cowser's sake because he deserves it, but we will certainly see when that voting comes out. There were other finalists announced for other awards. Gunnar Henderson was not an AL MVP finalist, not the biggest surprise in the world. He's probably like the 5th or 6th best player in the American League when it was all said and done, but still a great just season for Gunnar Henderson. And he did get rewarded by being a Silver Slugger finalist. Now, here is my programming note right here. I am recording this on Tuesday evening right now. The Silver Slugger Awards are being announced. We know the finalists, but they're being announced on Tuesday night. You're hearing or watching this episode on Thursday, so the Silver Slugger finalists are already announced, but because of just my schedule this week, this episode had to be recorded on Tuesday, but I'm still going to talk about these guys being finalists. We'll see whether or not they win. Gunnar Henderson is a finalist at shortstop, along with Bobby Witt Jr. of the Royals and Corey Seager of the Rangers. Gunnar was unreal this year, but Witt should probably win that award. He had a 168 WRC+, Gunnar at 155, Seager at 140, and also missed some time with injury. So Witt probably wins, but Gunnar does have a chance. He hit more home runs, and sometimes Silver Slugger leads you in that direction. Anthony Santander is one of the 5 finalists in the outfield. They do a weird thing where there's 3 awards given out, and there's 5 finalists. Yeah, don't really know there, but Santander is one of the 5 finalists. Also Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, Jarren Duran, and Riley Green. We know this. Judge and Soto will both absolutely easily win 2 of the 3 Silver Slugger Awards in the outfield in the American League. So there's really only one spot, and it's down to Santander, Green, and Duran. Santander with a 129 WRC+, Duran also with a 129, and Green with a 135. It is going to be a close vote. Santander now hit the most home runs out of all those guys, as we know, with 44 bombs. Duran had the best batting average and OPS. But when I think Slugger, I do think Anthony Santander, and that is the name of the award, the Silver Slugger. So I would give a slight, tiny edge to Santander to get the 3rd spot in that award. But again, Green and Duran had great years as well, so wouldn't be surprised if they won, but it would be cool to see Santander take home that hardware. And then at the utility position, Jordan Westburg was named one of the finalists, along with Josh Smith of the Rangers and Willie Castro of the Twins. Now, Smith and Castro are closer to utility guys. They play all over the diamond. Westburg more so just because he switches between 3rd and 2nd and had such a good year. This was kind of the way to get him into the finalists. And if they don't mind the fact that he's like not really a true utility guy, Westburg should easily win this award. Even with the fact that he missed a good chunk of time with that broken hand, Westburg had a 125 WRC+ this year. Josh Smith, 111, Willie Castro, 108. Those guys were, they were above average hitters, but not that much above average hitters. Westburg was an all-star level hitter for the entire year. These guys kind of faded in the second half. He did miss 6 weeks, so maybe that is a knock against him, but he's just by far a better hitter than Josh Smith and Willie Castro, so hopefully the voters saw that. And despite the weird thing with him being in the utility spot, he can win that Silver Slugger award in the same year that he does get his first all-star nod, would end to a really great season for Westburg. Everything besides getting injured, getting hit on the hand, it was a great 2024 for Jordan Westburg. And hopefully, again, by the time you're listening to this, it's already been announced, but hopefully it is a Silver Slugger award for Jordan Westburg. That'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. We've got one more show coming up for you on Friday. We may get some Orioles news. Seems like we're getting closer and closer to learn who the new bench coach is and kind of the rest of the coaching staff will be. But if we don't, that's okay. We'll still continue to review the seasons of some of these Orioles and maybe looking like another free agent wish list episode coming out on Friday. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.